so glad you're here. It's our community, it's our neighborhood, and it's our neighbor. Today, I have a most interesting person. His name is Ted Iliff, but he has had one exciting life, I do have to say, and we're going to talk about it today. You know, I read a quote, Ted, and it said, "News is history shot on the wing."
Or Phil Graham of the Washington Post said, "News is the first rough draft of history." Right. Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, I always read things about the things that make news are always targeted at the truth. To me, truth is a really interesting word.
And I teach, in fact, I had the lecture today, truth is a very misleading word. I tell students, and I told writers who worked for me, if you think you're telling the truth, you're probably fooling yourself, because we don't know the truth. We know what we're told, we know what we hear, we know what we see, we know what we've read, we know everything coming into us information-wise, but we only relay what we know. And if it turns out to be the truth, great. Often, as we all know throughout history, it's not. The first draft is not the most truthful draft, and we can come up with all kinds of examples of that. So,
well, Tom Dewey did not win the election.
That's just one great glaring example of it, right? I mean, we can go through several wars where things were said that didn't turn out to be true for the sake of national security, whatever. But the point being, truth is a very elusive thing. For writers that I teach or writers that I've managed, the issues for me are accuracy, language, fairness, and overall clarity, and taking the information you have and presenting it in the most accurate, most literate, fairest way possible. And then the reader, the viewer, the audience has the information that they can make a decision on, and then we'll see how it plays out and what historians find out about it 50 years from now or 100 years from now.
And I think that's true. I just wonder, though, does editorial thinking sneak into the news today?
You mean bias?
Yeah.
It's there. It's not sneaking in. It's a big old gorilla on every journalist's shoulder.
500-pound gorilla in the room.
It is. And everyone has biases. Yeah. Everyone, you cannot be a human being and not have certain biases. And how you function, how you are judged, how you live as a human being depends on how you deal with your biases and how you filter out the ones that aren't particularly good, and you recognize the ones that are perhaps favorable biases. Again, in teaching and in managing writers, David Broder said it best. He said, good journalists are skeptical of their sources and of their own biases. And so in class and in management, I always tried to say, be aware of yourself. Listen to yourself, know yourself and what you like and what you don't like. And when you're writing something or when you're reporting something and a little bell goes off that says, I like that, or that really felt good, ask yourself, why? And try to strive to figure out what you might be leaking into or pouring into a story that is a reflection of bias more than a reflection of fact.
Well, one of the more we've done a lot of interesting things, but one of the very interesting things that you have done was to set up Radio Afghanistan. Yeah. And you said that it was for news, information, and culture.
Right.
Now, when you set it up, what year are we talking about?
2012.
2000. So you just did it.
I mean, 2011. Sorry.
2011. Okay. Well, so you just did this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Talk about it a little bit. What was the cost? What kind of local cooperation did you have?
Well, you have to understand what kind of radio station it was at first.
Okay.
This was a U.S. Army created radio station, and it basically was a PSYOP, psychological operations radio station. It was created to influence the southern Afghanistan population, to bring issues to them that the Army and the coalition felt were not being brought by the regular media. Do you want to call that propaganda? If you want to call it that, fine. That's a very loaded word in American English, but yeah, it was propaganda in a way.
So, so I want to go back and pull out two words, a psychological operation.
Right.
Okay, so I think that's important.
It is designed to encourage Afghans to think a certain way about the coalition and about the government.
Okay.
What they did, this was at Kandahar Airfield. It was an FM station, 88.5, Radio Together, Radio Uwali. they put together the station, and the Army, it was the 10th Mountain Division, was in charge of that region at the time. They had no idea what to do with it once they got technically the thing built. So they hired a company, the company hired me, and I had a staff of about 25 Afghan journalists and studio technicians. And I had 2 other Americans helping me with the management of it.
In broadcast in English or in Pashto?
Pashto.
Pashto.
Yep. And so we had everything translated. And the Afghan journalists were told, you know, they know who they knew who they were working for, and they still are. It's still there. But they said, look, you got to have credibility. And every psychological operation manual you'll ever read, one of the first things it says is to have any kind of effect, it has to have credibility. So he said, you just do the news that you think you ought to do. You do the stories you want to do. We had reporters in the field. One of them was a woman, brilliant woman, very courageous. We talked about the provincial government not getting the roads paved. We talked about unemployment. We talked about bad security situations. And the 10th Mountain Division, to their eternal credit, was one of the only military unit I've ever worked with in a media capacity that said, okay, we got to take this. We don't like it, but we know for the sake of credibility we have to do this. So they were very light-handed in how the news and information and interviews and cultural programming was done on the station.
So you had rather of a free hand.
Pretty much of a free hand, yes. I mean, when there was something really, really sensitive, we'd tell them about it. Mm-hmm. And there was not, with the 10th Mountain Division, one time where they said, you can't run that. They would prepare a response, and we'd have the response as well. So they always had the first or the last word. It was their radio station.
Yeah.
We had call-ins. We had SMS texting where people would subscribe and get our headlines. And we played nothing but local music.
Did you get some interesting texts and call-ins?
Oh, absolutely. We got a really good feel for what people were thinking about certain issues.
Well, and that must have been of some importance to the.
That's the point.
Yes.
That's why they liked it so much, and that's why they
Did I win the prize?
You're very good. you get it. And the commanding general of Regional Command South called it the most effective psychological operation enterprise in the entire Afghan war. I think that was a little over the top, but they were very happy with the response that they were getting. And the SMS texting, when a bombing happened or there was something happening in Kandahar City, we would send out a text saying such and such has happened. Not as much of public service as stay away from that area, and they loved that. We learned attitudes about the Americans and about the coalition and about the government and about the Taliban. All of these things we learned from call-ins that we got every day.
See, I just think that's fascinating. Now, before you did it in Afghanistan, you did it in Iraq.
Yep.
Talk about your Iraqi station just a minute. It was a little bit different.
It was a lot different.
Yeah.
It was, the Iraq situation was in the late summer of 2003, right after the war. The Coalition Provisional Authority was running Iraq at the time. They wanted to create a PBS, NPR-styled public broadcaster for Iraq. Very idealistic, very good intentions. And so their first attempt didn't work very well. They brought me and a couple of folks that I knew in to create a national television network, a national radio network, and a national newspaper.
And what you did was, I must quote you, you insisted that the wire reports, the news agency pictures of the carnage, and the fact that we had sent a correspondent to the scene were more than enough.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But you insisted on that happening.
Oh, yeah, that with some success, and not always, but yeah, we said, look, we'll do the journalism here, because the military, the people at CPA were not journalists. And again, the issue was credibility. If you want the Iraqi people who have just been occupied, in effect, to start believing what you're saying, it's got to have a credible product. And we started doing newscasts in the evening. We started live broadcasts of demonstrations. We did live broadcasts of unrest in places like Najaf and Karbala and things like that. And we started getting some positive feedback. But there, the Coalition Provisional Authority and the Defense Department just couldn't let go. They had to have control of it. They couldn't just they wanted to shape the message and shape the whole, all the aspects of the
But see,
media.
that doesn't work because the people who are listening don't have the trust in the credibility of what's going on.
They knew who was putting that on, of course. You're absolutely right.
Well, and what I read a rather lengthy article on that subject, and it said that language was a problem too, because you didn't have anybody that spoke.
Well, they were all Iraqis.
They were Iraqis.
The Iraqi Media Network, that three-entity system.
But the people who were running that didn't speak.
Our supervisors, the folks at CPA, they did not.
They did not.
Yeah, they were working through translators, and that isn't very good. And they didn't understand what Iraqis needed at that point. And so the project, the effort lasted a year. A company I worked for, and then another company came in with the contract. When the CPA left Iraq in June of 2004, they handed the Iraqi Media Network over to what was the government at the time, the Governing Council, and later, and it has now become simply a government mouthpiece network.
Well, you know, one of the interesting problems see, I just think this is fascinating because when they first started the Iraqi network, they were going to interview Mr. Bremer.
Right.
And the translating was kind of a problem. And where he was also a problem because they moved him to the palace where Saddam Hussein had been, and that is the message that sent was not
Five
positive.
months later, it totally changed around.
Did it?
He asked us to do an interview program with him again. This was in December of 2003. We put it in a cafe in the hotel, in the Rashid Hotel. We picked the two Iraqi journalists who would interview him. The CPA had no voice in who was going to interview Bremer. It was unrehearsed. He didn't know what he was going to be getting in terms of questions. We rotated the two interviewers every week. He would come to the cafe, he would sit down, it was, you know, whatever happened, and he would honestly, through a translator in his ear, answer as best he could.
I think he was pretty honorable.
He tried.
Yes.
Yes, he was honorable, definitely,
yes.
He, in some ways, was given an impossible brief,
exactly.
I think.
Exactly. I think so, too.
But he recognized that was how he was going to communicate to the Iraqi people. It was just too little, too late.
Is it easy to evaluate these two attempts in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Well, in Iraq, yeah, that was 10 years ago now, and it became what everybody did not want it to become. And that's a government, just a simple.
What's going to happen in
Afghanistan?
Afghanistan?
Afghanistan is a different situation because it wasn't crushed. The entire society and system wasn't changed like it was in Iraq. Immediately after the Afghan war was over, media flourished again. And there's a viable media industry in Afghanistan now. And so with Radio Uwali, with the station we created, it is in 3 containers. It was the studios and everything, the newsroom was built in 3 containers. The idea being at some point, cranes will come in and trucks will come in, lift the containers up, take them outside the wire, put them somewhere, and either a private Afghan media mogul or a nonprofit or some institute or somebody will take it over and just run it as a
See,
radio
that's
station.
wonderful. Have containers will travel.
That's exactly right. It's
I love
totally
it.
portable radio.
I love it. You know, it's so interesting because today there are so many ways to send information and news flourishes 24/7. I found the funniest quote. Lyndon Johnson said, he said, you know, if one morning I walked on top of the water across the Potomac River, the headline that afternoon would read, "The President Can't Swim." And I just thought that was so funny. But it's a good segue into the many, many ways that information news is delivered today. Talk about that. I mean, we're just kind of bombarded.
Well, we're drowning in it in some respects. But the problem is there isn't too much information because there never can be too much information. But a lot of people are throwing up their hands and they're saying, I can't deal with all of this. I don't know where to look. I don't have time for this. And so they tend to gravitate towards the things that match their perceptions, to match their political ideas and their cultural ideas.
So it's a cafeteria.
It's a cafeteria, but they're always going for the fast food. They're not going necessarily for the nutritional stuff. And so the problem there is that perceptions and ideas get reinforced rather than getting challenged. The way I put it is, people love to be enlightened, but they don't like to be challenged. And so they don't mind learning new stuff as long as it doesn't disturb their view of how things really are. So we have a lot of information out there, but people aren't seeking out the information they might find a little bit contrary to what they normally think.
Do you believe that the public can know too much? I mean, as the WikiLeaks and all this.
In a state of war, yes. Only in a national security issue situation. I think the public, there are things the public doesn't need to know. Beyond that, I have a hard time defending any kind of withholding of information because I still have a pretty good, strong faith in the American public. They get it. They eventually figure it out.
Well, you said, and I quote you again, you said the challenge is to try to rise above your time zone, your hemisphere, and even your culture.
That was in the context of the international network, but of CNN International. But at the same time, yeah, you have to, as a journalist, you have a responsibility to present things that are not just what everybody knows anyway. I mean, that's not new.
That's right.
I mean, that's just,
right.
I don't want trivia
That's
or
right.
whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to take a little bit, as I said, kind of rise above all that a little bit, and not because you're superior to anybody, but you're just taking a different perspective to try to get a better, pardon the word, holistic idea of a particular issue, of a particular story.
Well, it's a responsibility of the journalist to present what's out there.
Yeah, yeah.
See,
And
I think,
as I tell my students, most journalists, the problem when they're putting together a story is not what to put in, it's what, they have to leave something out.
that's right.
And that exclusionary process is one of the key challenges of a journalist.
Well, in one of these articles I read, the comment was that American news is a great export. However, of late, it is an import. Al Jazeera is coming in an English language.
Yeah, Al Jazeera is
yeah,
one that
Al Jazeera. I'm sorry, I mispronounced it.
I've watched it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they're coming, and they want to make it clear. I was listening to NPR this morning, and they were discussing it, and they want to make it clear that they are even-handed, they are not biased in any way, but they are Al Jazeera, and so therefore,
they're going to have to say that, and in the context of what they're talking about, I would agree with them.
Yeah.
They present things that we don't normally see in America. In American news, they will present perspectives that are not anti-American or pro-terrorist, which is what some people accuse them of being. That is simply, I don't think that's sustainable, and I've watched them a lot in the Middle East, Al Jazeera in English. Yeah. They actually kind of changed their attitude and changed their philosophy many years ago because they were aware of that accusation. But what they do now is it's a different perspective of things, different guests, different commentators, and I find it fascinating.
Well, I do too. That's why I like the BBC as well.
Same thing.
Because they do the same thing, and I think we do export news, but I think of great interest is the news that we import as well.
Yeah, and with Al Jazeera America, I'm a little disturbed by the limits on its initial circulation.
Yes, they're not too many.
ATTUverse, for example, which I subscribe to and I think is a fine service, took them down, and I've been trying to figure out all day how to protest that because I think that's short-sighted.
So if I see your picture in the paper holding a sign.
Well, I don't do that kind of protesting. I tend to write things. That's how I do that.
Well, speaking of that, I saw an article that you wrote in the Star, and you talked about, it was rather of a dust-up, as the BBC would say, about unpaid internships.
That is, right now, is a pretty hot topic. There are a lot of lawsuits now popping up. There are a lot of complaints being filed, and it's something that's bothered me for a long time. And that, and we're talking here about for-profit companies. They're the only ones that apply in this case. Government and nonprofits are allowed to have internships that are not paid. But for-profit companies, as I understood the law and I read it, is that they can have interns as long as the interns don't contribute directly to the product of the company. Well, there are interns out there who are getting nothing, who are doing work of what normally would be a paid employee. And so what happens is they do work they're not being compensated for. They are taking the spot in many cases of someone who needs a job. And it's only a certain kind of person who can be an unpaid intern. They have to have some sort of financial support from the family.
Can't eat air sandwiches.
Exactly, and it's a limiter in some respect on who can get into the business. And I just think it's a bad practice. I understand why they do it. I understand the temptation. I've had to manage budgets, but at the same time, I just think give them credit, give them a stipend, give them pay for their a little apartment or something. Do something to compensate them, but don't work them for 3 or 6 months for free, and so that they walk away with the experience. That is, of course, important, but they've done work for the company and they should be paid for it.
Well, I just thought it only fair to air one of your protests.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay.
I want to talk about hackers just for a second here.
Hackers, okay.
Yes, I read a little article in the Wall Street Journal, and it said Washington Post and CNN news sites attacked. And there's a hacker group calling itself the Syrian Electronic Army, and they claimed responsibility for a cyber attack that affected news sites, including the Washington Post and CNN.com. The collective evidently supports Bashar al-Assad,
Right.
and they have multiple cyber attacks on news organizations. Can you talk about that a little?
Well, it's really not that much different than the cyber attacks on government and on private industry and every place else that we're seeing right now. All they're trying to do is they're just trying to disrupt information, and they're trying to make a name for themselves to get some attention for their cause. And this is a way of protesting what I'm sure they consider to be the biased, unfair, anti-Sadat, anti-Syrian, in some cases anti-Arab coverage that they're getting from those two organizations and other organizations. Cyber attacks are becoming an arm of foreign or security policy for almost every government in the world that can afford it. And so this is just another manifestation of that.
The world, it is a changing.
Yes, it is.
And I don't know. I would have to say that besides being a journalist and a teacher, you are a writer. Mm-hmm. And you have written a novel. Mm-hmm. And would you like to discuss your novel, The Golden Times?
Well, yeah, sure. It's historical fiction, and it's based quite a bit on oral histories I got from my family. My mother's German, my father's American. They met right after World War II in Germany, got married there. The oral histories of my mother's family surviving the post-war period, and a lot of the anecdotes, I did some research and added some things in. Mm-hmm. I also discussed in a broader sense how we did that occupation right. We don't seem to know how to do occupations anymore.
Well, we have so many.
We shouldn't be doing any, perhaps, but if we do an occupation, we ought to at least be able to do it right. We did it right in Germany, and we haven't done it very well since. And so I pulled all these things together into a novel, and there's some family skeletons I brought out of the closet for the sake of the story, and there's a lot of things that I made up. So it was just one of those things I really felt like writing, and it took me a while to write it, but I got it down, and it's published, it's out, and I didn't promote it that much. I didn't try to make a lot of sales on it, but it's there. It's gotten some traction, but it generally is a story that I felt needed to be told, so I told it.
It's called The Golden Times by Ted Iliff. But I think underneath your family and all that, you talked about a shattered nation. And you talked about the cities and the national soul that was scarred, has gotten somewhat less scarred, but it is scarred forever. And what happens out of the debris, sometimes the regime is salvaged.
Yeah, the amazing thing about Germany is you have to always be careful, because Germany has the collective guilt of the Holocaust, and it will never go away, and they admit and they concede it will never go away. So whenever you're talking about Germany in a historical context, that factor of German history is always there. But beyond that, here was a whole generation. My mother was part of that generation. Late teens, early 20s. They had grown up in the Hitler system. They had in their most important teen years, they had a war.
They had war, yeah.
Some of them fought in it, but all of them had been scarred by it. War ends, their entire country and its society is shattered, and they stand up and they say, okay, that sucked. That was terrible.
Now what do we do?
Now what do we do? And the Americans and others come in and say, okay, here's a little help. And they say, all right, now we know what to do, and they get on with it.
And some would say it was a German miracle.
Well, they call it the economic miracle, and it was. I mean, and I was there first as a kid in 1956, and I remember still seeing bombed out buildings and things like that. And again, hearing the stories that my German relatives tell, it's not like they overcame it, like they shook it off and it wasn't there anymore. It was like they had a bad case of scarlet fever. And or the plague, and the scars were all over them, and they'll never get away. They can cover them up a little bit, but they'll always be there. And yet they survived, they thrived, and they have prospered.
They have. You did write another book of nonfiction, did you not?
I did. It was a book called Hitler in Munich, and it was when I was living in Munich. Me and another guy, we were sitting there wondering, well, I wonder where Hitler did this, I wonder where Hitler did that, and we decided, well, let's do a book about it. And so we did.
You've had such an interesting life. Where are you going to go from here? What are you going to do?
I never know.
Sitting right put for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I've got the teaching going, and I've got things going on here in Kansas City, and most of the stuff I didn't even plan. It just sort of happened as things go along, And it's like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'll just wait and see.
But you're always and forever a journalist.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's. I think I picked journalism partly because it fit my personality, and it just was just a good fit all the way around.
We've spent most of your life traveling the whole world.
A lot of it, yeah. And that was, I went into journalism because I wanted to work internationally. I figured that was a profession that would get me overseas.
And the most interesting place you've ever stopped, where
traveled or worked?
Worked.
The most interesting place I've ever worked. It'd have to be Afghanistan. I mean, because I worked there so long, I really got to know it pretty well.
Real quick, what's going to happen when we pull out?
Well, the Afghans, this is from our call-ins, we actually asked that several times. Afghans, some of them say that because the Americans are going to be gone, there's no reason to fight anymore and the war is going to end. They'll reach a settlement and everything will be fine. That's a little Pollyannish, I think.
Yeah.
I think when we pull out, the Taliban will test the Afghan National Army. They'll see how far they can get militarily, and if they're stymied, then they'll enter into some kind of negotiations, and they'll take some ministries in a federal government and deal with it that way, and gain control of some provinces, probably in the South where they were born, where they're strongest.
Well, I have to say that it has been such a pleasure talking to you, Ted.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
And I would say to you, don't we have interesting neighbors? You know, I found another quote, and it said, and I think this fits you really well, because this is what you've done with your life. All of us who professionally use the mass media are shapers of society. We can vulgarize that society, we can brutalize it, or we can help lift it to a higher level. And that's what you've done with your life. Congratulations, Ted Iliff.
Thank you very much.
And thank all of you for visiting with us. It is our community. I'm Mary Davidson, and I'll see you soon, because we'll have another neighbor to meet before too long. Thanks for being here.